February 21, 2020. The pre-dawn chill hung heavy over the tarmac as Manchester Airport roared to life. For thousands of travellers, this was the start of a long-awaited escaped families wrestling, with luggage, business executives checking their watches, and the general hum of anticipation that fills a departure terminal. In the midst of this chaotic morning migration, a service known as Meet and Greet offered a slice of convenience. You pull up to the terminal, hand your keys to a waiting attendant, and walk straight to check-in, secure in the knowledge that your vehicle will be stored safely until your return. It relies entirely on a single, fragile element, trust. But on this particular Friday, that trust was being weaponized. As jets climbed into the grey sky, leaving the city behind, a shadow operation was already in motion on the ground. When travelers handed over their keys to men dressed in high-visibility vests and branded lanyards, they believed they were dealing with legitimate parking contractors. The paperwork seemed correct. The smiles were professional. However, investigators would soon discover that the moment the owners disappeared through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, the facade crumbled. These vehicles were never destined for a secure, CCTV-monitored compound. Instead, they were being driven immediately away from the airport, vanishing into the labyrinth of industrial estates on the fringes of Greater Manchester. The realization that something was catastrophically wrong did not hit all at once. It began as a trickle of confusion, a few returning holidaymakers standing at the curb, waiting for cars that would never arrive. Initially, airport staff and police assumed it was a logistical error, perhaps a rogue employee or a booking mix-up. But as the days passed, the trickle turned into a flood. Dozens of high-performance vehicles, Range Rovers, Mercedes, Porsches and Audis had simply evaporated. The sheer scale of the disappearances pointed to something far more sinister than opportunistic theft. This was logistics. The brilliance of the scam lay in its digital camouflage. The perpetrators had constructed a convincing online ecosystem. They created websites that mirrored reputable firms, complete with stolen logos, fake confirmation emails, and glowing testimonials that reassured customers they were getting a premium service at a competitive rate. By the time the victims realized they had been duped, their vehicles were already miles away, navigating the backroads toward areas like Oldham, Chadderton, and Radcliffe. These specific locations were not chosen at random. The industrial outskirts of the region are dotted with Victorian-era mills and shuttered storage units, relics of a manufacturing past that now provided perfect cover for illicit enterprise. Behind the rusted shutters of places like Stockfield Mill, the stolen luxury cars were being processed with terrifying efficiency. This was not just a theft ring, it was a disassembly line. The cars were not being taken for joyrides, they were being hunted for their parts, targeted specifically for their make and model to fulfill orders placed by buyers thousands of miles away. As police began to connect the dots, they realized they were not chasing a group of car thieves, but a dismantle and export empire that had turned the airport into its personal inventory lot. It would take months of forensic accounting and surveillance to peel back the layers of this operation, but when the picture finally resolved, it revealed a hierarchy that functioned less like a street gang and more like a corporate entity. At the top of the pyramid sat Asif Hussain, a man who, on paper, presented himself as a legitimate entrepreneur. His business, registered as German Automotive 365 Limited, listed a modest address and claimed to be a supplier of car parts. To the casual observer or a routine background check, it appeared to be just another small business navigating the competitive automotive market. But investigators soon discovered that the paperwork was little more than elaborate camouflage. The company was a ghost, a shell designed to provide a veneer of legality to an industrial-scale theft ring. Working in tandem with Hussain was Hadiad Ali, the man responsible for the day-to-day mechanics of the enterprise. While Hussain handled the high-level strategy, Ali managed the ground game, his name appearing on tenancy agreements for the very industrial units where the stolen vehicles were meeting their demise. The division of labor was precise. Sajid Jangharia acted as the transport specialist, frequently spotted moving freshly acquired vehicles between holding sites, while Tayyub Hasnain managed the logistics, ensuring the group stayed ahead of police attention by constantly shifting equipment and sourcing new premises. They operated with the discipline of a production line, turning the chaotic act of theft into a streamlined process. Inside the shuttered mills at locations like Chatterton, the reality of their work was stark. Recovered evidence would later show the brutality of the process. Pristine Land Rovers and Jaguars, stolen only hours prior, were stripped down to their skeletons. Chassis numbers were ground away, an attempt to erase the vehicle's identity, and parts were catalogued for export. But what truly distinguished this group from common thieves was their financial audacity. As the world grappled with the onset of the global pandemic in 2020, and legitimate businesses faced ruin, Hussein and his associates saw an opportunity to expand on the taxpayer's dime. In a twist that would later draw condemnation from the highest levels of the judiciary, the group exploited the government's COVID-19 bounce-back loan scheme. Designed to keep struggling companies afloat, these funds became the venture capital for organized crime. German Automotive 365, a company with no employees and no legitimate trade history, applied for and received £50,000 within a week. Another front company, Merck Carbreakers, secured similar funding. In total, the gang siphoned approximately £145,000 in public money. Instead of paying staff or rent for a struggling shop, the cash was funneled directly into the criminal infrastructure. It paid for the rental of new industrial units, the purchase of transport vans, and the upfront costs for shipping containers destined for overseas ports. The financial wizardry was overseen by Ibra Shafi, the group's money handler. He moved the stolen loan funds and the proceeds from illicit part sales through a labyrinth of personal and business accounts, washing the money to make it appear as legitimate revenue. This was the engine room of the company. They were not just stealing cars. They were forcing the British public to subsidize the theft. By the time police connected the flow of government cash to the disappearances at the airport, the network had already transformed into a multi-million-pound export business, confident that their blend of corporate fraud and industrial theft was undetectable. They were wrong. The unraveling of this empire did not begin with a confession or a slip-up in the paperwork, but with the silent, unblinking eye of technology. While the gang believed their digital camouflage and corporate fronts were impenetrable, they had underestimated the sheer density of the surveillance grid watching the roads. The breakthrough came via the automatic number plate recognition (ANPR) system used by Greater Manchester Police. Vehicles that had been reported missing from the airport valet bays began triggering alerts, not near the terminals but on obscure routes leading into the industrial heartlands of Chatterton and Valet Radcliffe. These were not random joyrides. The data showed a deliberate migration of high-value assets into specific, clustered zones known for shielding illicit activity. Detectives from the Vehicle Interference Unit quietly began to close the net. Surveillance teams were deployed to the shadows of the industrial estates, watching the roller shutters of the suspected units. The pattern they observed was disciplined and distinctive. By day, the sites remained dormant, blending in with the surrounding inactivity. But as the city slept, the units came alive. Vans arrived under the cover of darkness, and vehicles, some still warm from their airport journey, were guided inside. Once the doors were sealed, the work began. The noise of industrial tools cutting through metal was masked by the ambient hum of neighboring workshops, allowing the crew to operate undisturbed. By early 2021, the intelligence picture was complete, and the time for observation had ended. In a coordinated strike, designed to sever the network's head and limbs simultaneously, police launched a series of dawn raids. At 5:00 a.m., tactical teams breached multiple locations across Oldham, Wigan and Stockport. The element of surprise was total. Inside the units, officers found exactly what the data had predicted: a high-speed production line of destruction. The floors were a graveyard of luxury engineering Range Rovers, Porsches and Jaguars, reduced to their bare metal skeletons. Engines were already wrapped in plastic, tagged with shipping codes, and stacked on pallets, while the sophisticated electronic brains of the cars had been removed to bypass security protocols. The physical evidence in Manchester was damning, but it was the shipping logs that revealed the true scope of the damage. The network had already dispatched 11 massive freight containers out of the country. Through international cooperation, 3 were intercepted mid-transit, one at Seaforth Dock in Merseyside, another in Istanbul. and a third as far away as Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. When authorities cracked the seals, they did not find the used auto parts declared on the manifests. Instead, they found the dismembered remains of Britain's stolen fleet, concealed behind walls of scrap metal to fool X-ray scanners. The legal reckoning, when it finally arrived in January 2022, was severe. The courtroom fell silent as prosecutors laid out the sheer industrial scale of the operation. Judge Anthony Cross KC did not mince words, reserving particular scorn for the group's exploitation of the pandemic relief funds. He described the use of bounce-back loans to bankroll organized crime as a catastrophic failure of oversight, noting that money intended to save livelihoods had instead been used to destroy. Asif Hussain received 15 years, with his lieutenants Ali and Jangharia receiving 11 and 10 years respectively. The company had been dismantled, its leadership incarcerated, and its assets seized. Authorities believed the message had been sent, but as the prison doors closed, the demand for illicit luxury vehicles overseas had not dropped by a single %. The market was still hungry, and where there is demand, a new supplier will always emerge. The incarceration of Asif Hussain and his lieutenants was hailed as a decisive victory for law enforcement, a decapitation strike against one of the UK's most sophisticated car theft rings. But as the dust settled in the courtrooms of Manchester, investigators monitoring the global data streams began to notice a troubling anomaly. The signal had not died. While the specific nodes in Oldham and Chadderton had gone dark, the international receiver network was still wide open, blinking with activity. The company had been removed, but the infrastructure of demand it served was too vast, too profitable, and too entrenched to simply vanish. The empire had not been destroyed, it had merely lost a supplier. By March 2025, the reality of this global appetite became undeniable during Interpol's Operation Safe Wheels. This was not a raid on a rainy British industrial estate. It was a continental sweep across 12 West African nations, including Ghana. Police set up checkpoints on dusty highways and busy city streets, cross-referencing passing traffic against the global database of stolen assets. The results were staggering. Officers flagged luxury SUV after luxury SUV, vehicles that were legally registered and driven by unsuspecting owners who had purchased them in good faith. Yet, under the hood, the VINs told a different story. These were the ghosts of British driveways, laundered through layers of forged paperwork and maritime shipping routes, until they washed up on a new continent, effectively untouchable. The tentacles of this trade reached far beyond Africa. In the bustling port city of Karachi, Pakistan, the onboard tracker of a Range Rover stolen weeks earlier from a quiet street in Harrogate pinged its location. It was not in a chop shop but parked openly in a driveway. Similarly, a Bentley Mulsanne vanished from London, only to reappear in the prestigious Defence Housing Authority district of the same city. It had been fitted with forged plates, a trophy of British engineering now serving as a status symbol thousands of miles from its lawful owner. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Southeast Asia under Operation Titanium. In Bangkok, authorities raided high-end showrooms and uncovered a cache of 30 vehicles worth over £6.50 million. Among them sat a Lamborghini, Huracan, Spider, Porsches and Mercedes, all gleaming under the showroom lights. These were not scrap. They were being sold as premium imports. The investigation linked these vehicles to finance fraud thefts in the UK, proving that the pipeline could transport a supercar halfway around the world with the same ease as a shipping crate of bananas. Back on British soil, the pressure at the borders was intensifying. The sheer volume of metal trying to leave the island was overwhelming. In 2023 alone, the Stolen Vehicle Intelligence Unit in Essex intercepted over 60 shipping containers, recovering around 240 vehicles with a combined value of £13 million. The inventory read like a catalogue of XS, Ferraris, Range Rover Sports, and even vehicles belonging to Premier League footballers. Inside the steel containers, officers found a masterclass in criminal logistics. SUVs were stacked precariously on old tires, suspended by cargo straps in a game of high-stakes Tetris to maximize space. The message was clear. The global machine was still running. From the showrooms of Bangkok to the streets of Accra, the demand for prestige British vehicles was insatiable. And where there is an insatiable demand, the market will always find a way to provide a supply. With Hussein's crew behind bars, a vacuum had formed in the underworld of Greater Manchester. It was a multi-million-pound gap in the market waiting to be filled, and as police would soon discover, a new generation was already revving their engines, ready to step into the void with a new name and a dangerous new attitude. By the early months of 2023, the silence that had fallen over the industrial estates of Oldham and Chadderton began to break. It started as a low-level murmur in the intelligence reports landing on the desks of Greater Manchester Police, a resurgence of familiar patterns that felt less like a new crime wave and more like a ghost story coming back to life. Vehicles were vanishing again, plucked from driveways under identical circumstances, and the trail was leading back to the same grim, shuttered mills that had housed the previous operation. But this time, the shadowy figures moving behind the scenes carried a different energy. They were not just filling a vacuum, they were building a brand. They called themselves 50. The name itself was a calculated insult. In the lexicon of the street, 50 is a slang term for the police, derived from American pop culture but adopted globally. By adopting it as their moniker, this new collective was not hiding. They were taunting the very detectives tasked with stopping them. It was a statement of arrogance. A declaration that the trade had never truly stopped, merely changed hands. This second generation of the network was younger, faster, and more volatile. At its center stood Asif Matadar, a figure well known to law enforcement from previous vehicle inquiries. While not a direct lieutenant of the incarcerated Hussein, Matadar operated in the same ecosystem, utilizing shared contacts, overlapping suppliers, and the exact same freight agents who had facilitated the earlier exports. The operational blueprint was eerily similar yet evolved. Where the previous group relied heavily on valet fraud, the 50 network specialized in high-tech driveway acquisitions. Using sophisticated signal cloning devices, often referred to as relay boxes, they could unlock high-end SUVs silently without ever touching a key. The cars were driven away in the dead of night, heading straight for the chop shops that had sprung up like weeds across the region. This resurgence, which investigators dubbed the return of the yard, was decentralized. It was not a single monolith, but a constellation of independent cells. Shawaz Rahman ran one of the busiest dismantling units in Oldham, stripping vehicles within hours of their arrival. Imran Taj managed the logistics of moving the parts, while Zian Ali and Muhammad Irfan acted as the surgical team, removing trackers and obliterating chassis numbers with industrial grinders. However, the most dangerous evolution of this new crew was the blurring of criminal lines. Under the old company, the operation was strictly business fraud and theft. The 50 network introduced a volatile new element, the crossover into narcotics and street violence. Adam Elwood, a key member of this younger cadre, represented this reckless shift. Elwood did not just move cars, he reinvested the profits into drug supply chains. The stolen vehicles were not just product, they became tools, used as disposable transport for drug runs, or as getaway cars for dangerous driving offenses. His involvement signaled that the disciplined, corporate-style fraud of the past had mutated into something grittier and far less predictable. James Hopkinson, the financial architect for this new era, managed the money through various auto salvage fronts, linking the group's revenue streams back to the same laundering methodologies used years prior. Together, these 7 men had rebuilt the infrastructure of Manchester's stolen car economy. They believed that by decentralizing the yards and diversifying their criminal portfolio, they were insulated from the kind of sweeping raid that took down their predecessors. They were confident that the police were looking for a single head to cut off, not realizing that the network had become a hydra. But as they expanded, confident in their 50 brand, they failed to notice that the sky above their yards was no longer empty. A new operation, codenamed Avis, was already underway. And this time, the police were watching from above. By mid-2024, the 50 network was operating with a sense of invincibility, unaware that their digital and physical footprints were being mapped in real time. Operation Avis, the counterstrike launched by Greater Manchester Police, had turned the tables on the surveillance game. In a twist of irony, The very technology the criminals used to scout for thefts was now being used to hunt them. Police drones hovered silently in the night sky above the industrial estates, their thermal cameras capturing the heat, signatures of engines arriving at the yards, and the ghostly movements of men stripping them down. Down on the ground, unmarked units sat in the shadows, logging every arrival and departure, building a timeline that would leave no room for alibis. To seal the trap, investigators deployed bait vehicles, high-value targets, flagged by insurers equipped with silent tracker beacons. Within hours of being lifted from driveways, these digital breadcrumbs led detectives straight to the doors of the network's 8 primary sites. The evidence gathering was meticulous. Financial forensics traced the flow of money from these grimy garages to accounts in Eastern Europe and the UAE, masked as payments for logistics and performance upgrades. But the customs data told the true story. The parts being shipped matched the VINs of stolen British cars. The net was tight, and it was time to pull it in. On a biting cold morning in October 2024, the endgame began. At 5:00 a.m., the silence of the suburbs was shattered as tactical teams executed simultaneous warrants across Oldham, Stockport, Radcliffe and Wigan. The raids were synchronized to the second to prevent any warning messages from being sent. Behind the reinforced shutters, officers found the undeniable reality of the 50 Enterprise. The floors were a chaotic mosaic of luxury waste rows of half-dismantled vehicles, dashboards stacked like firewood, and engines wrapped in plastic, tagged with destination initials for Turkey, West Africa, and the Middle East. Computers seized at the scene displayed shipping drafts for containers that would never leave the port. The arrests effectively swept the board. Asif Matadar, Shawaz Rahman, Imran Taj, Zian Ali, Adam Elwood and their financier James Hopkinson were all taken into custody. The subsequent trial in October 2024 laid bare the sophistication of their operation. Judge Neil Usher described the network as a highly professional enterprise that had industrialized theft. The sentences handed down reflected the severity of their resurgence. Adam Elwood, whose criminality bridged the gap between theft and the drug trade, received the longest term of 6 years. Shawaz Rahman was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months, while the ringleader, Matadar, received 3 years and 6 months. In total, the group faced a combined 25 years behind bars. The dismantling of the 50 network marked the end of the second generation of Manchester's valet theft saga, from the brazen airport scams of the original company to the high-tech relay thefts of their successors. The story serves as a stark reminder of the relentless demand for illicit luxury. One empire falls, and the silence returns to the industrial estates, but for how long? This case proves that while the faces may change, the mechanics of organized crime remain a constant battle between enforcement and innovation. What are your thoughts on the sentences handed down? Do you think the penalties match the scale of the crime? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the underworld of car theft intriguing, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more true crime investigations. Until next time, stay safe and keep your keys close.